Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to present two people whom I have coveted as guests from the start. And I am thrilled to present this episode as we celebrate the retirement of one of these guests after a long and distinguished run as the head of the Nashville Symphony. Trust me, I promise you will leave here today smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a little bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I'm a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the business. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. And in this series, my goal is to help you make more connections. And I invite you to take every advantage of that opportunity today. Specifically, I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat window, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And also, please ask questions of our speakers. And also, this is very important. Please make sure that your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not continue to do this for free. Special thanks to MedJet, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, and my favorite music industry podcast, Unlimited Supply. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome my friend Andy Van Roon. Andy is a writer, executive producer specializing in packaging, financing, and distribution of film, television, and related media. He is founding chair of FilmCom, an annual business conference and development market for feature films, scripted television, and non-fiction series and documentaries, which to date has connected creators from over 700 U.S. and international projects with agents, managers, execs from studios, networks, and production companies. FilmCom helped launch ScoreCom, ActorCom, ScriptCom, Cine TV Latino, and has supported the International Black Film Festival and Women in Film and Television Nashville. Andy was elected president of the Nashville Film and Video Association, was founding president of Film Nashville, founder of the original Tennessee Film and Television Coalition, integral to the launch of film incentives with the 2006 Visual Content Act, founding producer of Nashville 48 Film Project in 2003, which to date has generated approximately 1,000 short films, with some serving as prototypes for feature films and television pilots. He's also produced over 200 film industry seminars and webinars, designed and taught several MFA courses at Lipscomb University, guest lectured at multiple universities and film programs, and has published over 800 industry bulletins. He's currently writing and exec producing several feature films, scripted TV, and documentary projects. He also has an MFA from USC, and it is an honor to welcome Andy to host this today. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
And joining Andy as today's featured guest is none other than Alan Valentine. Alan joined the Nashville Symphony in June 1998. Since then, he has presided over an unprecedented period of growth in the symphony, highlighted by 14 Grammy Awards and 27 Grammy nominations, more than 40 highly regarded and best-selling recordings on the Naxos, Decca, Deutsche Grammophon, and New West labels, 9 national TV and streaming broadcasts, 3 Emmy Awards and 4 Emmy nominations, multiple national radio appearances included the internationally syndicated radio series American Encores, 2 critically acclaimed Carnegie Hall appearances, and a sold-out East Coast tour, 2 very successful capital campaigns which raised more than $145 million, and the construction of the world-class, acoustically superb Skimmerhorn Symphony Center. Alan currently serves on the board of directors of the League of American Orchestras and is former member of the boards of NARAS, the Nashville chapter, the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, the Nashville Arts Coalition, the Association of Nonprofit Executives, Center for Nonprofit Management, the Nashville Downtown Partnership, and the Nashville City Club. In addition, he's a member of the Rotary Club of Nashville, a 2002 graduate of Leadership Nashville, and a 2008 graduate of Leadership Music. It is my honor to welcome these two gentlemen to our platform today. Take it away, guys.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Tom. Alan, you want to say a couple of opening words there?
No, go. Let's
Uh,
just launch
let's
in.
let's roll. Tom, we appreciate Alan and I and our community appreciate everything you've been doing for our community and industry for quite a long time, and you facilitated the coming together of many wonderful discussions. And I have learned from a number of them just by tuning in and listening. So we want to thank you very much for all that you have done, Tom Truitt. Alan, Tom, you actually sort of introduced Alan with some of the remarks I was going to make. But by the way, he's done three capital campaigns for 167 million. And Alan, if you've added to that, let me know. But the remarkable thing is that Alan and I have known each other since 2009 and have been pals then. He's helped with FilmCom a number of times. And when we were getting ready to do this discussion, he sent me his CV, and the CV is like, a mile long. And so our biggest challenge today is getting through all the relevant points, or as many as we can in the time allotted. But more than the accolades and the accomplishments that he's done at multiple venues, from starting in San Antonio and going to Houston and then Washington State and then crisscrossing to the other coast to North Carolina, back to San Antonio, back to Chattanooga, and then to Oklahoma before he came here. The one thing that I've gotten to know him for is that he has a real humility about everything he's done. He's very appreciative for all the people he's met, all the opportunities, all the energies that he's been surrounded by. And that's why he's a beloved human being. And I think that's why he's accomplished so much, is because we all really know his heart and soul and where he's coming from. And without further ado, Alan, I'd like to kind of rewind from this huge tapestry of meaningful experiences over the last few decades into how it all began. And let's start with San Antonio when you were a wee lad and talk a little bit about what life was like and kind of like your first inklings of getting involved in music. What was that like?
Well, before I do that, Andy, I do want to say one thing. And none of us accomplish anything by ourselves. And my list of gratitude is extraordinarily long. And so I hope that also comes through today that I really owe anything that I've been successful at to the people that have been around me, that I've surrounded myself with. And that starts with a really fantastic family when I was growing up in San Antonio. So, what life was like as a kid? I mean, I grew up in a pretty normal kind of middle class house. My father was branch chief of the Human Resources Lab for the Air Force. That is the chief HR psychologist for the Air Force. He was known as the father of the ASVAB. He created that battery of tests that everyone takes when they join the military in any branch. And my mother was a math teacher and calculus teacher, and actually started her own software company to provide software to teachers and then ultimately students. And was really good at math and science, as you can imagine, because my mom started me very early. And when I was quite young, I was also drawn to music, and I started with a toy drum set and a toy guitar, and I taught myself how to play that toy drum set. And, anyway, one thing led to another. And by the time I was 14 years old, I had my first real job, and it was as the drummer for the non-denominational church services at Lackland Air Force Base. And I had to go get a Social Security card for that job. And it was really something. But in high school, I aspired to be an aerospace engineer, believe it or not. I thought I had a plan that included going to Texas A&M University and studying aerospace engineering. But when I was a senior in high school, I went down to the office one day, dropped calculus, switched to music theory, which was this will astound some people. Was offered in my public high school in Texas, and came home that night and announced to my parents that I had decided that I was going to become a musician, and that was an interesting day at our house. Uh, but to my father's great credit, he came off the ceiling first. They both eventually did, but my mother was convinced I was going to starve to death. And anyway, so started applying for schools, got into Eastman, got into North Texas, but ultimately was offered a full ride music scholarship to Houston, which is where I ended up going. And I'm glad I did because that is where this odyssey started. I landed the timpani job in the orchestra as a freshman, and as a sophomore, a friend of mine in the percussion section came to me and said, "Listen, I'm going to drop out of school, go to work for my father. I've got a student work study job as the student orchestra manager. And if you'd like to have it, it's yours." And so I started doing that job thinking, great, I'll make some spending money. But over the years, I was in school, I realized there was an aspect to this field that had never crossed my mind. And I loved it. And so I decided to pursue it. And with the help of, again, this theme of many people, Milton Cadams, the conductor and viola player, was dean of the music school. He got wind of my interest in orchestra management, and he called me down to his office and said, "Listen, I feel terrible that we don't have a curriculum here to help somebody like you, but let's go talk to the dean of the business school and let's make you a curriculum." And so that's what we did, and was really grateful. By the time I was a senior, I began applying for jobs, and lo and behold, landed a job in Washington State at the Mid-Columbia Symphony, a community orchestra, where the staff consisted of me, a half-time secretary, which was the word you used in those days, and a full-time conductor, and we were the staff, and that began my career outside of college. And so, um, along the way, a lot of things have happened, of course, but I do want to say something that, as I got to that job, I remember driving into that community. It was made up of three smaller cities, about 100,000 population in the Washington desert. And I came over this hill driving a U-Haul truck, towing my car, and I looked at that spread of the community below, and I thought to myself, geez, do I really know what I'm doing? I mean, college is, la la land compared to the real world. And I thought, well, I'm just going to have to pretend like I know what I'm doing until I figure it out. But I didn't have to do that at all because all of those folks at that orchestra on the board and in the community understood that they'd hired a kid right out of school. And their attitude was, don't worry about it, we'll help you. And they did. And I learned so many things from so many people in that first job and in the subsequent jobs as well. So just to blow through this real quickly, after a couple of years there, I began applying for the next position, landed in Greensboro, North Carolina, as the CEO of the orchestra there, and where I worked with Peter Paul Fuchs. And that was a terrific experience. While there, I was able to implement a touring program and led them through their silver season celebration. And anyway, when I wasn't even looking for a job, I was recruited to go to San Antonio, back to my hometown, to serve as the orchestra manager. That is the number two person on the staff. And I did that, went back to San Antonio, and while there, a couple of years later, was recruited to go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and run the symphony and opera. I was then the CEO of the symphony and the opera, which had merged. And so I was the first executive there in charge of the merged organization. And then from there, I began applying for jobs and landed in Oklahoma City, where the task was to put back together an orchestra that had gone out of business under the weight of a year-long strike and some financial challenges that were kind of the remnants of the oil bust, if you remember, and failure of Penn Square Bank and all of that. And I worked with a fabulous conductor there who was the founder of that orchestra, a guy named Joel Levine. And the two of us set about putting an orchestra back together. And it's a very long story I won't go into, but after then 10 years there, I felt very attached to that community. I was recruited, got the call about Nashville, and there were two other orchestras trying to recruit me at the same time, but Nashville had always intrigued me because as a musician myself, a percussionist, I continued to play some. I always felt like Nashville was a place where you could do a lot of interesting creative projects that were probably not possible to pull off anywhere else in the world because of what Nashville is. So I always had this kind of sense that it would be a great place to work. And one of the things that I found interesting about it was that there was a sort of, I guess, developing kind of crossover genre that I really wasn't a big fan of at first. And I felt like the word crossover was not an apt description of what actually was possible in the creative realm. And it sort of put a label on something that in the eyes of some people in the industry, actually in the orchestral industry, was viewed, through a sort of negative lens. And so, I thought, well, it doesn't have to be that way. We're way too consumed with putting labels on things. So I found it very interesting. I didn't let the headhunter or the people in Nashville know that I was that interested, though, in the job. And I was lucky enough then to land the position.
But Alan, the symphony at that point was at TPAC, correct?
That's correct. And
By
so,
then?
well, a couple of things. First of all, before I started my job here, I came to look for a place to live after I'd been hired, but hadn't yet started. And I had breakfast with Kenneth Skirmahorn. And I said to Kenneth, tell me about your dreams and aspirations for the orchestra. And he talked about wanting to build a great orchestra. He said, this is why I came to Nashville. And he came to Nashville in the early 80s. And he said, but we've had all these fits and starts. We had a strike. We had a bankruptcy, I mean, and it's been a little frustrating. And he was even sort of sounding like, maybe I won't work out my final contract here and I want to retire. And I looked at him and I said, well, Kenneth, I think it is possible to do what you want to do here, but I think the hall is our biggest obstacle to making that happen. And having heard a concert or two in the Tennessee Performing Arts Center, and it's not that it's a bad hall, it's just not designed for an orchestra. And he said, well, I know that, the musicians know that, but how are you going to convince the community of that? And where in the world are we going to find all this money? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know, but I think if we don't try, we're not doing our jobs. And he said, well, I suppose you're right. And we started having fun. And I will say that in those early years in Nashville, knowing that we wanted to work toward the idea of building a hall, we began to do certain things that were really informed by one of my experiences in Oklahoma. While I was in Oklahoma City, the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building took place. And, without even thinking, the musicians, the staff, all of us came together, the board, and, our feelings were all about what can we do to be helpful? We can't go dig bodies out of a building. But music, of course, is a powerful force. And we decided that if there were going to be any kind of memorial service, we should get involved. So after a few phone calls, the city manager, the mayor, and then the governor, we learned that the governor's office and his wife in particular, Kathy Keating, was putting together this memorial service for the bombing. And the president was coming, Bill Clinton came, a number of dignitaries from Washington, the governor and his wife were, of course, very involved. And we put the music together in 72 hours' time. for that memorial service, and it was televised around the world. And one of the things that I will never forget as long as I live was the orchestra playing Ravel's Pavane for a Dead Princess, while the mothers who lost their children in that daycare center were seated literally just a few feet away from the orchestra with teddy bears and pictures of their children. And the orchestra was in tears, the audience was in tears, and that whole experience really taught me that you know orchestras are very risk averse institutions, and they're institutions that are always struggling financially. They have a lot of challenges financially, and they may have some good times, but they also have the other times. Um, but one of the things that we tend to do is we always want to figure out first who's going to pay for whatever we're doing. And it taught me that sometimes we have to think about the community first. In fact, we need to do that all the time. And the resources will follow that. And so when I got here, I felt like, well, we need to really endear ourselves to the community if we're going to ask the community to believe in us enough to build a hall and to begin building the institution. So we started doing things without really worrying about where uh, the um, uh, the resources were going to come from, because we had to have faith that they were going to come. And so we did things like playing for the opening of the new library, playing for the opening of the Frist Art Museum. We offered our services to play for the opening of the Titans football stadium. And we did that on national TV. Also made our numbers look really good in our grant applications that year, by the way, because we had played for an additional 70,000 people.
Mhm.
But those experiences really helped contribute to the narrative about the orchestra wanting a new hall. We also planned a trip to Carnegie Hall that was to culminate an endowment campaign, which we launched shortly after I arrived. And that concert at Carnegie Hall, uh, we felt would set a target date for winning the campaign. And we decided that we would offer travel packages to Nashvilleians to go with us. In the end, we thought maybe 100 people would show up. 1,100 people followed the orchestra from Nashville to New York
Wow.
for Carnegie Hall. And it was quite a remarkable experience. And I think if I'd have known then what I know now, I would have hired a travel agency to manage it. But it was really quite something, and really, I think, sparked the imagination of the community's leadership about what we could have in Nashville. And we got a rave review from the New York Times on top of it. Not one of those pretty good for a regional orchestra kind of reviews, but a bona fide. Alan Kozin called it a knockout. And so we were on our way. And there are lots of details about things that had happened along the way, but we, and I, by the way, I've had experience in my previous positions with new halls and renovations, and I guess we all learn through the school of hard knocks. So you make your mistakes, and you learn from every one of those projects you're involved in. And by the time I got to Nashville, I realized that we had to do certain things to assure a good result. And one of those was making acoustics the number one overriding priority for the project. And we did that. We also hired a truly incredible architect, David Schwartz, in collaboration with Earl Swinson and Associates and Hastings Architecture. And when I say this, what I want to do is say that David, we were very worried about there being conflict between acoustician and architect, and wanted to make sure that both of those parties reported directly to us so that we could, um, arbitrate those kinds of disputes. But as it turned out, David was himself a classical music lover. He traveled, he was able to rattle off who his favorite conductors were, his favorite pieces, his favorite halls. And we really ended up with a team that understood that if the hall failed acoustically, it would be deemed a failure. And what we got, it takes a certain amount of good planning, but it also takes a certain amount of luck. And I guess the gods were smiling on us, and we had a lot of both. And so it really, and it was a project that was bigger than the sum of its parts. It really engaged the entire community, and we were able to pull that off successfully. But when I think back about my tenure in Nashville and my career, the things that I find most memorable, the opening of the hall was a big deal, and what we achieved with it was a big deal. The quality of what the orchestra was able to produce in the hall, all of that stuff mattered. Well, when I think about the highlights, I actually think about the musical moments, the things, the projects, the community that we built, and I really find that those things are my fondest memories because after all, the hall is but an instrument, and it's the orchestra's most important instrument, but it is ultimately an instrument that was there to enable us to do some quite incredible things. And I've been talking quite a while here, Andy, and I'm probably ought to come
Well,
back to you to
you and
ask
I,
a question or two, but
I think we've set this hour up for you to talk, and you and I did quite a bit of prep for this because you got so much ground to cover that we wanted to make sure that we got everything done. Regarding so it's okay. By all means, ramble. I mean, ramble forward. But the concert for 911, you want to talk about that a bit?
well, yeah, we were interestingly enough when 9/11 happened. We had decided, Kenneth Schermerhorn, of course, I was privileged to work with Kenneth for the last 7 years of his life. He was music director when I arrived. And by the way, that talk of maybe not even working out his first contract changed, or his final contract changed, because we started having a great time together, the two of us. And we were like brothers. We were no secrets from each other, but we worked together planning seasons. And we had developed a relationship right away with Naxos, one of the leading distributors of classical music, and we agreed to do recording work in their American Classic series. It was a vision Klaus Heyman had that American music needed to be recorded, needed to be documented. And Kenneth and I both already had a penchant for a fondness for contemporary American orchestral music. Kenneth's penchant goes a little further back than mine. He was a big fan of the New England School of Composition and composers like, Ives and Amy Beach and Chadwick and so on. But we started recording for Naxos, and Klaus asked us to do a recording of West Side Story. So we planned actually, instead of just performing a concert version and recording it, we decided to actually produce West Side Story together with the Tennessee Rep. It's now the Nashville Rep, the Repertory Theater. And we put that together, and we were in the middle of the run of that show when 9/11 happened. And
Amazing.
the board had already voted to pursue the concert hall project. And we hadn't really gotten completely started. We'd raised a couple of major gifts, lead gifts for the hall. But when 9/11 happened, the cast had gone back to New York for a few days off, and all the flights, of course, were canceled after that. So they had a hard time getting back, and they had to rent a car and drive back. But we persevered and continued to perform West Side Story, even with all of that going on. I remember going out on stage and talking to the audience about how President Bush had said to all of us, "Keep doing what you do. Don't stop, because if we stop and we let them disrupt what we're doing, they win." And so I made a little talk, something to that effect. and we played the national anthem. We pulled the national anthem out of the library and started playing that at the top of every concert for a while. But it was a very moving experience because, the whole subject matter of West Side Story is based in New York, and it was really an unbelievably powerful moment. There was also a lot of sort of self-examination that went on. We had a committee, steering committee for the concert hall project, made up of some community leaders, and we all got together and talked about, well, now that this has happened, what do we do? Remember, the stock market kind of took a little bit of a dive for a little while, and we ultimately decided that pursuing the concert hall project, in spite of what challenges may come, was also about what's right and good in the world. And so we decided that we were going to move forward in spite of what we thought were going to be some challenges, some roadblocks, and proved to be a wise decision. And but that event was really quite something. There were a number of those though across the life of the orchestra. One of the things that we did, we opened the hall in 2006, and we had, that was a big moment for all of us. But we actually performed the first concert in the hall for uh, uh, it wasn't for a public audience, it was for the construction workers, the consultants, and their families. And it filled the entire Schermerhorn.
That's beautiful.
And it was in the summer of 2006, about a month and a half before we opened. And I should back up and say that unfortunately, Kenneth Schermerhorn was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in the spring, or actually February of 2005. And by April, he was gone. And we were heading toward the biggest moment in our history, and doing it without Kenneth. And luckily, he knew the hall was going to be named for him before that happened. But I began thinking about, where am I going to find a conductor with the right profile and the right kind of artistic sort of proclivities, that is a commitment to contemporary American music, somebody who's enjoyed a career, and that has a profile that will help us catapult the orchestra to the next level, to build on Kenneth's legacy. And immediately, Leonard Slatkin came to mind. Now, for an orchestra like Nashville, we didn't have the hall yet. A lot of people didn't know what we were doing. That was a pretty big, leap, a pretty ambitious idea. And I just went to work on it. We had a search committee that we had established to find Kenneth's successor. And luckily, I was, with a lot of persistence, was able to convince Leonard Slatkin to come on board as our artistic advisor during that very difficult period, and to conduct the opening of the hall. And Kenneth and I had already programmed the opening concert. So I thought, well, we have a new conductor for the concert. I need to, talk with Leonard about, do we keep the same program? Does he want to change it? So I flew up to the Kennedy Center, and before going up, I had been asked by the League of American Orchestras, by Jesse Rosen, to record. Would the orchestra consider recording "Made in America," a work that was commissioned by a number of small budget orchestras, at least one in every one of the 50 states. And it was by composer Joan Tower, and the Ford Foundation, which helped fund it, wanted a recording. Jesse knew of our recording activities. So we had thought, we'll do that in the summer. Well, when I went up to see Leonard, we talked about the program. We met in his office between rehearsals at the Kennedy Center, and he tweaked a couple of pieces, kept a couple of other things, like the last two movements of the Mahler second, the Resurrection. He said, that's a really beautiful homage to Kenneth. Let's keep that. We kept the concerto, which we had already commissioned from Bela Fleck, Egner Meyer, and Zakir Hussain. Again, going back to that, creative projects idea that you can only pull off in Nashville. And we then talked after that about the idea that, we had this recording project we'd been asked to do. And I asked Leonard, I said, is there any chance you would want to come down and conduct this project? You can meet the orchestra, see the hall, and understand what you're getting into before the day arrives that you come to conduct the opening. And he called his assistant in. It was the only week he had open all summer, and he agreed to do it. And that began our relationship. And I think he was pretty amazed when he got there. I don't want to speak for Leonard, but I know that we went to lunch after the first rehearsal, and he was really just full of questions about how do we do this, and what kind of community is Nashville, and it was quite something. That recording swept the classical Grammys that year. It won Best Orchestral Performance, Best Classical Album, and Best Contemporary Classical Composition. And so we'd been recording. We'd had a couple of nominations in the past, but that is what kind of impact the concert hall made even before it was finished. Even before the acoustician, Paul Scarborough, and his team had finished the final treatments to the walls of the hall, it just spoke volumes about what the hall was going to do for us. In order to prepare for that concert, we did this hard hat concert and filled the hall with the construction workers and their families, and they were all blown away. And what I found interesting is that they had no idea that they weren't supposed to like contemporary music and contemporary orchestral music, and they loved it. And of course, a piece like Made in America is perfect for construction workers. And the orchestra, Joan and Leonard all gave a tip of the hard hat at the end. Everybody had a hard hat under their chair, and gave a tip of the hard hat to the workers. But they were the first people to hear music in the hall. Then, leading up to the grand opening, which was, by the way, a $2,500 a head affair, white tie and tails, the whole thing. Leading up to that, though, we had a series of free concerts for the community. So everyone in the community could participate in the grand opening of the Skirmahorn. And those were really fantastic moments. And again, it's this idea of building community, because ultimately, the gala was important to raise some additional money, but ultimately this concert hall needed to belong to the entire community. And I left out a lot of things. We created a community advisory committee that really worked, through different organizations and different subsets of our community to build support for the project all through the process. And I remember flying up to New York once for a meeting, and I got in line at TSA, and this is while we were under construction. And I got up to the TSA worker who she took my driver's license and my ticket, and she looked at it, and her eyes got this big, and she looked up at me and she said, "You're Mr. Valentine with the symphony, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh my God, I am so excited about this new concert hall. I'm on one of those committees." And I smiled all the way to LaGuardia. I was just like, it made my day. I said, if we've gotten to her, we've done something,
And you did. Sure.
and so we really did a lot to build community support, and it paid off. But once inside the hall, and by the way, one of the key impacts of the hall was that the last year we were in TPAC, we had $2.6 million in total ticket sales. I mean, when I got to the orchestra, the budget was $6 million. And we had 2.6 million in the 2005-06 season. In 2006-07, the first year in the hall, we tripled that number to over $7 million. And so the hall had an immediate and very positive impact on the organization. But what it allowed us to do on the other side of that was some really incredible work. We began building, and with Leonard's great help, the quality and content of the orchestra, in terms of, there was the musicians were better able to hear themselves, and we were able to challenge them with new projects. We did a syndicated radio series called American Encores. I think Tom mentioned that earlier. Um, we That was syndicated by WFMT out of Chicago, but it was focused on for the first two seasons in the hall. Every single one of our classical subscription concerts contained a new work by an American composer that had heretofore only had its world premiere and never been played since. And you wouldn't believe that we found a work by Ned Rorem that had only been played once. And there were so many worthy works. And Leonard Slatkin and Edgar Meyer co-hosted that radio series, and it was a big success. Then we ultimately appointed Giancarlo Guerrero as music director, and he began to build on the legacy that Kenneth started, that Leonard Slatkin had built upon even further. And what was interesting about Giancarlo's tenure is his connections to composers were yet with a still different generation in many cases of composers. And so, it was an interesting evolution. And his tenure, of course, continued to build the orchestra. We continued to win additional Grammy awards, and receive Grammy nominations. And by the way, we did broadcast the opening of the hall, and it was done in high def. It was back in the days when high def was pretty fledgling. A guy named Robert Swope here in town produced it.
Our
And,
friend.
yeah, and he and I worked together on it. But we won an Emmy Award for that. And I remember PBS saying, well, we can't really put it in the schedule, but we'll put it up on the satellite and it will be a local option to pull it down. It was pulled down in every market, every single market in the US. And so
Talk
that
about
was a
marketing.
big success. And as we went through the years, we did so many really, I think, incredibly interesting projects. The orchestra continued to get better and better and better, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of is how well the orchestra plays today and how well it serves this community. We did things like a program called Violins of Hope Nashville, where we brought the Violins of Hope to Nashville from Israel, and we commissioned a new work. I think I saw a minute ago that Steve Brozvik is on this listening in. Steve was our chief operating officer then, and he actually pulled together a fantastic museum quality exhibit at the Nashville Public Library. He also really served as our point person and went over and met with the Weinstein family, the violin maker Amnon Weinstein. And we brought him the instruments here, I guess it was a little over like 31 or 32 instruments for a period of about 2 months. And during that period, we managed, and we worked with the local Jewish Federation on the project. We managed to sell out 12 classical concerts in a row, which is unheard of. We commissioned and performed a work by Jonathan Leshnoff, his Third Symphony, which we recorded with those instruments. So we were the first orchestra to record with those instruments. And let me tell you, they're not great instruments. Most of them were klezmer instruments, and they'd been through all kinds of things and had to be reconstructed by Amnon. And yet, in the hands of our musicians, they were so moved and inspired by those instruments that the result was spectacular. And the recording is a fantastic recording, but the Weinsteins were so inspired, so moved by that they conspired with our Jewish Federation. Mark Friedman was then the head of the Jewish Federation. That the last night, by the way, the last set of concerts we did on a classical series in that project were, of course, performances of Verdi's Requiem for reasons that I'm sure a lot of people on this podcast listening in will know, because it was performed as a protest in one of the concentration camps. And but coming on stage beforehand, I needed to thank a number of people. And Avshi Weinstein was on stage with me to explain to the musicians or to the audience where the instruments were in the orchestra. And he had an instrument in his hand. And I didn't think much about it. Well, Mark is out on stage as well to say a few thank yous. And lo and behold, I look over and Steve has shown up, and they flipped the whole thing around, and the family gifted us one of those instruments
Mm.
because they were so impressed with what happened. And I almost started crying on stage. It was a really powerful moment. But what I said to the audience after I got it and got my composure back was that we wouldn't consider ourselves the owners of the instrument, but the caretakers of it because it belongs to the world, and that we would use it to keep the message of hope alive. And that's what we've done with it. We send it out to schools. We do all kinds of things with that instrument. And but those kinds of moments, we had a lot of challenges along the way too. We had, the economic meltdown of '08. We had that created a lot of trouble for the capital structure on the hall. We had tax exempt bond debt. Yes.
Alan, can we talk? We have about 10 minutes left, 15. Can you really go into, now that we're into challenges, can you really talk about the entire episode recovering from the flood?
Sure, I was just going to do that. So after the economic meltdown, which created its own set of problems, before the markets could recover during that period, we had a flood in Nashville it was a flood that was, I guess they said, a 500-year flood. Maybe some people said it was a 1,000-year flood. But the flood did $40 million worth of damage to our building in the 5th year we were open. And it was pretty devastating. It was also the thing that if I look back and I had to say, what was our finest hour? It was the aftermath of the flood. The water crested in our basement. We had 24 feet of black water in our basement. Somebody mentioned the pianos being upside down. Yeah, who knew? Pianos float, by the way. When I called the Steinway dealer, he said, of course they're upside down. I was like, how do you know? He said, because pianos float like a boat until they can't go any further. So they hit the ceiling and then they capsize and flip over and land on their tops. And at any rate, the flood within the water crested in our basement on a Monday afternoon while the sun was shining brightly. I watched that happen. It was the water table rising up into the building. And 4 days after that incident on Friday, we played a free concert on the steps of the courthouse for the citizens of the community, all while our hall was uninhabitable. And the mayor and I both spoke. And the next day, the headline of the Tennessean read, "Music, Muscle, and Money. Nashville opens its heart." And the rest of the front page was a 3/4 page picture of Giancarlo Guerrero in a sweeping moment conducting the orchestra with a sea of people behind him. And here we were, our building's completely, we have no idea, how long it's going to take to rebuild it. It's completely damaged. And yet here we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. And at any rate, a lot of incredible things happened after that. Ben Folds called me and he said, "Listen, man, I can't believe this happened. Orchestras matter to communities. It matters to me that we have a great orchestra." And he offered to do a benefit concert that led to deeper engagement by Ben in the institution. He ended up on our board. And he also launched a fundraiser called, I think I see Sharon is in the chat, called Keys to Music City. And he took his own flood damaged piano keys and autographed them and auctioned them or sold them for $1,000 a piece
Wow.
online. Gave us $88,000 from that, and then he continued it with other artists that were friends of his autographing keys, and he got more piano keys. And it was an incredible time. But we put the hall back together in 8 months' time. We were very fortunate that the League of American Orchestras, they have a fabulous lobbyist, Heather Noonan, who worked with the museum folks, the zoo folks, and some of the other arts, national arts organizations. And they got the FEMA regs changed in 2008 to include auditoriums, theaters, and so on that are owned by nonprofits that are generally required to be open to the public, and made those institutions eligible for FEMA relief. Cedar Rapids got some relief from that when the Mississippi River floods damaged their hall. And we were I think, the second concert hall to access FEMA. But we had FEMA funds, we had some insurance, and a lot of support from the community. But we put the hall back together in 8 months. I will say this: FEMA doesn't come write you a check and say, here, fix your building. You have to fix it, pay for it, and then collect the money. So we financed it by selling assets in a liquidity portfolio from the campaign for the hall, and it took about 7 years to get the money back. So we took the money out of the market when it was worth 50 cents on the dollar and put it back at $1.50. And that's the shortest way to say that what we were dealing with was largely misunderstood in the press. But we survived all of those things. They were traumatic things, you know.
Plus the pandemic.
But music perseveres. Music it has great power to help us feel, think, examine things, and to overcome even the most daunting kinds of moments. Anyway, that's kind of the story of the flood. There's a lot more to it, but it generated one of our finest moments. It really showed the community what we're made of, and how resilient and adaptable we can be. And I will say, the one other very challenging moment that we're still feeling a little bit was COVID. And COVID, led us to a place where we had to do some pretty extraordinary things that I think none of us ever contemplated. But what was different about COVID than any of those other things was that COVID stopped us from doing the very thing that we're here to do. We had to pivot. We did some things online and all of that, but the live concert experience is a community type event. It's a communal event. It's one we experience together, and it can mean something different to every single person in the audience. But COVID actually, was very different than those other things. Even during the flood, we were able to reschedule our concerts into other venues and move out and work to restore the building. So, it was a very different kind of experience. And I think on this side of COVID, what we've all observed, and I think it's probably true even for a lot of people on this call listening in who are in the commercial music industry, is audience behavior and the behavior of the public with respect to tickets and going out has changed some. And I think that's largely a function of people having rediscovered their kitchens, their big screens, and that it's okay actually to stay home every once in a while. And so we're all still rebuilding from that. There are certainly plenty of concerts that are sold out, full houses, all of that. But there are other moments that are much more challenging. And I think it's influenced by a lot of factors that maybe weren't as big a factor before COVID. But anyway, that's kind of, in a nutshell, some of those challenging moments. I will say though that there are lots of other moments that are just super fantastic. Like we commissioned Hannibal Akumbe. This didn't get performed until after the flood, but to create an opera basically called The Jonah People. and it was staged. It was held in the Schermerhorn, and it was an utterly fantastic event. And that was another highlight, artistic highlight. Also, we had uh, been involved in the co-commissioning Julia Wolf's Her Story, and Her Story was really a piece written to commemorate the centennial of the women's suffrage, the passage of the 19th Amendment. And some people may not know this, but the passage of the 19th Amendment became law because of Nashville, because of Tennessee. It was passed, 36 states had to ratify the amendment for it to become the law of the land. And Tennessee was the 36th state, and it passed by one vote in our state legislature. So it was very appropriate that we did that piece here, and we did the premiere, and we also recorded it. And that album, by the way, should be out sometime in the next 6 to 8 months. And but it was a fantastic experience, and there have been so many of these kinds of things that we've done and that are very meaningful because it's very much connected to Nashville and what Nashville's all about.
Alan, in the last few minutes, can we talk about the auspicious return of Leonard Slatkin? Leonard,
Yes. So, we maintained, of course, a relationship with Leonard after his tenure as artistic advisor, following Kenneth's passing, and he would come back to guest conduct periodically. And as Giancarlo Guerrero made the decision to step down, it just happened that we had Leonard coming to guest conduct. And all of us, musicians, staff, board members, were after that week that he did thinking, wow, we'd forgotten how much we love Leonard. And, I wonder, would he be interested in coming back and helping us yet again? And he's at a very different place in his life and career, and he gladly agreed to do that. And then as we thought about it, we thought, it's going to take us a while to do a search in any case. Why not ask him if he'll be the music director, And to our great delight, he said yes. And so we have Leonard Slatkin back now, not just as artistic advisor, but he's actually our music director. And we're deeply grateful for that. We've had a great time planning. He had a big hand in planning the upcoming 26-27 season, and it's going to be filled with all kinds of incredible moments. But two highlights are one is the opening weekend, which will be preceded, by the way, the week earlier with a big outdoor community concert featuring Peter Boyer's American Mosaic, which involves screens and the orchestra and narrators and all. It's going to be a really big moment. And then we go into the hall, of course, the next week, and we're doing a piece that really is designed to celebrate some anniversaries. We're celebrating this year the 20th anniversary of the opening of the Schermerhorn. We're celebrating the 80th anniversary of the birth of the orchestra in 1946. And of course, it's America's 250th this year. So hence the Peter Boyer American Mosaic. And the first program is focused on American music and will be an extraordinary program. But among the things on that program are a performance of Copland's old American songs. Some of the songs Leonard has chosen with both local and performers who are sort of what I would call Americana artists. And that's going to be a big highlight, as is the performance in January of Final Alice by Del Tredici. It's a great work. We'll essentially turn the whole thing into a children's concert for adults. But the Del Tredici is a work that was commissioned for the bicentennial of America. And here we are in the semi-quincentennial. I can't believe I remembered how to say that. And we have some really incredible concerts. I see Paul Zamek is reminding me about Renee Fleming and Bela Fleck. That's also going to be a fantastic special in September. But the Del Tredici is going to be an opportunity for us to create something even bigger than a normal classical concert and begin really experimenting with new ways of presenting what we do. And because it's programmatic, of course, it's based in Alice in Wonderland, and it will give us an opportunity to do some immersive programming kinds of things. There'll be some light mapping, and we're working with a company called Journey on creating an absolute fantastical kind of concert experience for the audience. So, this is something that we're just so blessed to have Leonard back and to have all of his creative energy. He has more ideas than a lot of conductors half his age, and I just am so grateful to know that as I leave this phase of my life and I leave this beloved institution, it's something I care deeply about, that I'm leaving it in really good hands with Leonard Slatkin, and it means so much. And I will say that I've been blessed to walk in this building now for the last 20 years, but to walk into my office for the last 45 years. And every day I walk into my office filled with a deep sense of gratitude to those who came before, and gratitude to all of the people around me who've helped me. And because none of what I've been able to do or been, privileged to be part of would have been possible without all of those incredible people. So, and I think the future for orchestras is really bright. I think we're going through a bit of a period where things will be challenging for a little while. But if you look at the longer history of orchestras and you go way back, you'll find that orchestras go through these moments. And, I remember the league publishing an article in Symphony Magazine one year that was all about how it was predicting the demise of orchestras. And it was a reprint from Time Magazine. And it was talking about how much trouble all of these big orchestras were in. And the editor's comment at the end of the reprint, was, sounds like it was written yesterday, doesn't it? Well, it was written in 1960. And guess what? We're all still here. I
That's
have great faith in the ability of yet the next generation to find new solutions and to find new ways to creatively solve the challenges, because after all, what's left of civilizations past? The arts, literature, the arts, all of those things. And I think ultimately that is uh, really an important thing to note.
Thank you, Alan. That was a beautiful hour. For those who, and that was probably only about 7% of everything that I know about you. For those who would like more, they can contact Tom. He will have Alan's CV, so you will know like the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. But Alan, you are again, I think your humility and your appreciation for all the people around you is exactly why you've been able to accomplish so much tremendous work. And what you articulated with, Violence of Hope and the Murrah Building and the courthouse steps recovering from the flood and everything else you've done also reflects incredible perseverance through like many things, but also incredible sense of, meaning to the work. And we really appreciate the tenure of these last 28 years that you brought to our town and that you brought to Music City, with an international caliber orchestra and a world-class concert hall. So we deeply thank you for the time you've spent with us. And, I'm getting kind of emotional myself, just kind of going through that, but we certainly are looking forward to the great things ahead that you are planning now. Tom?
That's a mic drop. Alan, I can't add anything to that. That was magnificent. What a great story. An incredible leader you've been for so long. And we didn't get to talk about what's next, but we'll leave that for another time. But
Yeah.
congratulations on wrapping up a fantastic career. Andy, thank you for bringing Alan to the platform today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I've been chasing you to be a guest here for so long, and you waited for the perfect foil to bring. So thank you so much.
We'll
Thank you,
flip the
Tom.
tables then, Tom, and I'll interview Andy. How's that?
I would be all about that. That sounds like a great match.
I would not be all about that. I'd rather that you interview Anastasia Brown, who I know is listening to this. She's a
Well, I
magnificent
know
human being.
Anastasia too, and she's fantastic.
She's a
She is.
magnificent human, and she should be interviewed on your show. I think she did a Who Knew in the past, but I think doing a webinar would be a fantastic thing. Perhaps a discussion between her and Sharon Corbett would be interesting. Anyway, enough of that. Alan, Tom, thank you for the opportunity for the dialogue. Any last remarks by either of you?
No,
Alan, over to you. Nope.
just thank you to everyone, and thank you to everyone who showed up to listen in and support me. I'm just overwhelmed, really. So thank you all.
We love you, Alan,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
what a lot of people don't know is that you're still playing drums. I think a lot of people
Yes.
actually do know that. You've got an upcoming gig with
Yeah.
Box One, but
Yeah.
I think one thing I'd like to read for those who are still with us is a text message that you sent to me a few days ago, and it reads, "I've done a lot of work. I got a chance to ride my Moto Guzzi tonight. I've done a lot of work on it. Between work and the rain, I've had no opportunity to ride. So tonight I decided to take a few hours to myself, feeling like $1 million now after a good long night ride." And that could not be a more poetic way to conclude this for our motorcycle rider and president CEO of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Amen. God bless you.
Thanks. Thank you all so
Live
much.
long and prosper.
Yes.